Dr. Ben Bikman, glucagon's critical role in maintaining our metabolic health.
I don't think it's bad. And I say that just because we know there are people who do that, like individuals who actually adhere to very, very strict ketogenic diets in order to control their epilepsy. For example, I know people who adhere to it in order to control migraines, where the moment they get off a ketogenic diet, they get really debilitating migraine headaches. And I know of no negative consequences in these people. So I would say you can certainly adhere to a strict ketogenic diet long term. And if you do have that reverse metabolic inflexibility, it doesn't matter because you're doing it in a state of low insulin. And that low insulin is going to keep you healthy and lean at the risk of oversimplifying disease. However, for the rest of us that adhere to a low carb diet to just be lean and healthy, my priority is to be a healthy, involved dad, and someday to be a healthy, involved grandpa. I'm kind of thinking long term. I want that. I want to be that kind of grandpa. That's why I adhere to a low carb diet. But I also live in a family and we have carbohydrates around. I end up adhering to what some would call a cyclical ketogenic diet. Not because I feel a compulsion to sprinkle in carbs. It's just the practical way of doing it for me in my home, where I am very, very strict with every breakfast for myself. I'm very strict with every lunch for myself. And at dinner, depending on what the family is eating for dinner, I will be a little more liberal with carbohydrates. The fact that it keeps me a little more metabolically, genuinely flexible, shifting between the fuels, that's nice, but that doesn't worry me necessarily. However, maybe having said all of this, the person who's adhering to a very strict ketogenic diet and then they have one horrific cheat day or cheat meal, I do think that can have negative consequences. A paper was just published last week, which took people. This was a randomized double-blind controlled trial. So it is powerful in that regard. And its conclusions can be looked at as very authoritative. They took people with diagnosed confirmed fatty liver disease, the most common liver problem. And the only intervention was to have one group eating less fructose. And they had much more substantial, significant improvements in fatty liver disease. So I do think we ought to be scrutinizing insulin. And I would say never drink your fruits. Eat them. Don't drink fruit. Eat it. First order, my sentiment is always whatever the carbs are, let them be fruits and vegetables. That's sort of and done. Those are your carbs. And the next order thinking would progress to vegetables that grow above the ground and avoiding the tropical fruits, pineapples, mangoes, these more sugary fruits. Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe at that same order of thinking, it's really to focus on the least sugary fruits like berries. And I think citrus would qualify as well. Those are the nice ones. There is, without a doubt, protein has an insulinogenic effect. There is an insulin response to protein. When you eat that protein with fat, however, it is blunted. You've mitigated that somewhat. So all the more reason to eat that protein with fat, as nature always has the two come together, always. Well, unless it's a fruit oil like avocados or olives, which is fine. Those are fine. But focus on that protein and fat. And in the context of a low carbohydrate diet, the insulin response to that protein is significantly less than it is if you're eating protein in the context of a high carbohydrate diet. And then to bring in this new character, glucagon will act somewhat as the opposite. It's the yin and the yang of metabolic regulation. What insulin is telling a cell to do, glucagon is commonly telling the cell to do the opposite. And so what happens in a low carbohydrate diet with the consumption of protein, you do get a modest insulin effect, but it is matched by an equal or greater glucagon effect. And so I introduced this concept, newly introduced, although it's an old idea, of the insulin to glucagon ratio, in that where that ratio is staying similar to a fasting level, then don't worry about what it's going to do to your ketones, or don't worry about what insulin is going to do at the fat cell, because glucagon is there to keep insulin's effects in check. It's there to counter insulin. And so that was the gist of it. So glucagon is a hormone that stimulates ketogenesis. It stimulates lipolysis. It does all these things that we want within reason, of course, but it's just acting as a balance.
Yeah. What causes it to rise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Typically the most potent stimulus is is the opposite of what insulin's stimulus is. Insulin is stimulated with elevated glucose. Glucagon is stimulated by low glucose. So anyone who's adhering to a low carb diet or fasting, their glucagon levels will absolutely be elevated. And that's necessary. It's helping the body mobilize energy, including the breakdown of glucose from the liver and the production of new glucose, activating gluconeogenesis.
Some use a ketogenic diet to control epilepsy or migraines, and there are no negative consequences. Low insulin will keep you healthy and lean. My priority is to be a healthy, involved dad and someday a healthy grandpa. I follow a cyclical keto diet as a practical way of living. I'm strict with breakfast and I'm strict with lunch. But dinner with family, I will eat some carbs. Someone who is adhering to a very strict keto diet then has one horrific cheat day can have negative consequences. In a randomized, double-blind controlled study, participants with fatty liver disease, one group had less fructose. The result, that group had substantial improvement in their fatty liver disease. Don't drink your fruit, eat it. The first order for carbs is to eat only fruits and vegetables for carbs. The second order, get your carbs from vegetables that grow above ground and avoid tropical sugary fruits, and try to choose berries and citrus. Protein has an insulinogenic effect. However, protein and fat, when eaten together, mitigates that insulin effect. On a low-carb diet, insulin response to protein effect is significantly less. Glucagon is the yin to insulin's yang. It will tell the cell to do the opposite of what insulin has said. Any insulin effect is matched by equal glucagon effect. Insulin to glucagon ratio. When at fasting-like levels, glucagon will keep insulin in check. Glucagon is a hormone which stimulates ketogenesis, lipolysis. Glucagon itself is stimulated by low glucose, by adhering to a low-carb diet or when fasting.